And the next talk is also online. For that we are moving to Portugal, and the talk is about power lines and birds and the problems they create. They tend to build nests on power lines, very bad. And the presentation will be given by Joana Bernardino.
Hello everyone, my name is Joana Bernardino, I'm talking from Portugal, and today I'm going to present a work that we did in Rede Biodiversity Share, which is a research protocol set between my institute, CIBIO, and Rede, which is the company responsible for the transmission grid in Portugal. And here we investigated the spatial-temporal patterns of electrical faults caused by birds in the transmission grid, and also evaluated the success of the mitigation program implemented by the company. As you may know, birds can be responsible for a large amount of electrical faults in electricity grids. These faults reduce the service reliability and can be responsible for power outages. And faults in distribution lines, which are the smaller lines with lower voltages, are usually caused by bird electrocutions, but in transmission lines, which are the larger ones with very high voltages, particularly when we're talking about lines with over 150 kilovolts, electrocutions are very rare, and faults are usually caused by other interactions between birds and the infrastructure, like the use of pylons for nesting. And nests can interfere with the electrical system due to materials that can fall and get in contact with the conductors, or through bird droppings, which can bridge the airspace between conductors and the infrastructure, or because these droppings can also contaminate the insulators. So in Portugal, the population of white storks take advantage of the electricity pylons for nesting. In 30 years, between 1984 and 2014, the proportion of nests on pylons increased from 1% to 25%, and this means an increased risk of electrical faults. To tackle this problem, since the mid-90s, Rede, the company operating the transmission grid, implemented a nest management program, which included several actions, like the removal of nests from dangerous locations, typically above the nests located above the conductors, and then also installed anti-perching devices with rotating spinning features, and provided alternative nesting platforms for storks. So in this study, we started by evaluating the spatial and temporal patterns of electrical faults caused by birds in the transmission grid, and then also we evaluated the success of this nest management program implemented by the company. To do that, we used 3 large data sets. The first one with information on transmission electrical faults on a national scale. The second one with information on white stork nests on transmission pylons. And the last one with information on the measures implemented by the company, like the number of anti-perching devices and alternative nesting platforms that were installed. These datasets were provided by Rede and covered a large period, 18 years period, which is uncommon, and usually this data is not available for researchers that work with wildlife and human conflicts. So, what were our main findings? We found that lightning, as expected, is the main cause of electrical faults in the transmission grid. But then, after that, birds are the second cause. They are responsible for 25.3% of the faults, and the majority of these faults are attributed to interactions between the infrastructure and white storks. In terms of the temporal variations in bird-related faults, we have not seen a clear seasonal pattern, but there were some months with higher number of faults, like April, which is during the breeding season of the species, and then we had also a high number of faults in October and November, which means, or at least suggests, that white storks may use pylons also for roosting. In terms of the hourly patterns, as expected, the number of electrical faults was higher during the night period when storks spend more time in the nest, but we can see a clear peak in the early hours of the day, which is typically when storks are more active and also produce a larger amount of droppings. In terms of spatial patterns, here in the map we can see that faults are mostly concentrated in central and south Portugal, which roughly coincides with the distribution of white storks in Portugal. And as expected, the fault rates were positively associated with a percentage of pylons used and occupied with the stork nests, and also with the correlated number or overall number of nests per 100 kilometers of line. Finally, in terms of the evolution over the years regarding stork nests and the mitigation actions implemented by the company, here we see that between 1998 and 2018, the number of stork nests on pylons increased a lot, and with that also the number of anti-perching devices and nesting platforms installed by the company. And despite there was a threefold increase in the number of stork nests, we found that the bird-related fault rates decreased significantly. There was a reduction above 95%, which means that overall the management program implemented by the company was a success. So what are the main take-home messages of this work? We have seen that white storks account for a large amount of electrical faults in the Portuguese transmission grid. The bird-related faults are partially explained by their overall number of nests and the proportion of pylons occupied by the species with nests. But we also have seen that bird-driven faults and their seasonal and spatial patterns suggest that storks may use the pylons also for roosting, including outside the breeding season and regardless of nest presence. This is a topic that still needs further research, and if it will help us to tackle the remaining fault rates. In terms of the effectiveness of the nest management program, we know that the company implemented their actions carefully, only targets nests in dangerous locations, and because of that, white storks continue to use the transmission pylons for nesting. The long-term effectiveness of the program, we can see that it reduced significantly the bird-related electrical faults, and we expect this program to be successful also in other countries where storks are common. And that's it. I would like to thank my co-authors, both from CIBIO and Rede, and also thank all the institutions that supported this study. Thank you very much.
Joana, thank you very much. Is she on the Zoom? All right. Time for questions. Denise. Yeah, there is a microphone coming.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I would like to know if you noticed an influence of the context where the occupation by the birds occur. Is it urban, open field, or are there explanations from the local context?
In Portugal, the nests are mostly concentrated in areas that, like near wetlands or rice fields, and also wasteland fields, because these are the main places where white storks go feeding. So there is a relation between that, those habitat features, and the presence and occupation of pylons by storks.
Okay, I'm Lisa Garnier. I'm working at RTE, so the French electricity grid, and I want to know if you have an hypothesis why it's in the early morning that the faults are important.
There is something that still needs to be further investigated. Some studies suggest that in the early morning, before birds taking off, they start to getting more active in the nests, and also release more droppings before fecal droppings before leaving the nest. So we don't think, due to this pattern, we believe that most of the electrical faults are caused by droppings and not by falling materials of the nest, because the building of the nest is done during the day, and so we have that peak in the early hours of the morning. So we think it is because of the droppings, the large amount of droppings that is released at that period. But there is something that still needs to be further investigated and confirmed.
Thank you very much.
Any more questions? I have one question, Joana, about preventing measures. Did you look into that? And, for example, alternative nest sites, or is that working or not? So they choose other places.
So far the alternative platforms installed by the company in the same pylons, like they remove the nest during the non-breeding season, they remove the nest that is causing problems. Usually they are only on the top of the pylon above the conductors, and then they provide alternative platforms in the same pylon, and usually stork seems to adapt well, and you start using those alternative platforms. So that is why we have still a huge increase of numbers of nests on pylons in the transmission grid, regardless of this removal or management program implemented by the company to tackle faults.
All right, thank you very much. Never occurred to me that droppings was really the problem there. I thought it was the nest or the birds, but it's the poop.
Yes.